Imagine a dinner table. 6 people. The bill comes. And one person at the table, let's call him the loudest one, the one who's been talking about his investment portfolio all night, says the words almost everyone at that table has said at some point, "I can't afford that right now." Here's what's interesting. Many people who have built lasting wealth rarely frame decisions by saying, "I can't afford that." Not because they have unlimited money, not because they're reckless, but because their relationship with money tends to run on different mental software, is the language they use, and more importantly, the language they have quietly stepped away from. What you say about money often reflects how you think about money. And over time, the way you think about money can shape many of the financial decisions you make. The people who have built real, lasting wealth, not the ones performing wealth, but the ones actually building it, have dropped certain phrases from their vocabulary entirely, not because they were told to, because those phrases stopped being accurate once their thinking changed. I'm Eunice, and this is Wealth Tactics. Today we're going through 6 things that wealthy people have quietly stopped saying, and more importantly, what they replaced each one with. Here is the rule for this entire video. What you say about money in public is performance. What you do with money in private is strategy. Most people perform wealth, or perform the absence of it, without ever examining the assumptions buried inside the words they use. Today, we're going to examine 6 of those assumptions, one by one. Before we get into the list, one important thing to understand. This is not about positive thinking or affirmations. It is not about telling yourself you're rich until you believe it. This is about something more specific and more useful, the way your language reflects your mental model of money, and the way your mental model determines the decisions you make before you're even aware you're making them. When you say, "I can't afford that," your brain accepts that statement as a closed answer and stops processing. When someone with a different financial mindset encounters the same situation, their brain asks a different question. And a different question produces a different decision. The language is the entry point. The decision is the outcome. And the outcomes, compounded over years, are the difference between 2 very different financial lives. Here are the 6 phrases. See which ones you recognize. The first and most common. Almost everyone has said it. Most people say it multiple times a week without thinking. Here's the problem with "I can't afford that" as a phrase. In many situations, it isn't literally true. And using it trains your brain to think in terms of binary permission. Either you have enough or you don't, rather than in terms of trade-offs, priorities, and timing. When someone with a wealthy mindset looks at something they're not going to buy, they don't say, "I can't afford it." They ask, "Is this the best use of this money right now?" That is a completely different cognitive operation. "I can't afford it" closes the question. "Is this the best use?" keeps the question open and anchors the decision to priorities rather than permission. The reason this matters practically, when you think in terms of "can't afford," you stop thinking about what you would need to do to change that equation. When you think in terms of "not the best use right now," you keep your agency in the picture. You're not blocked by your income. You're making a choice. Choices can be revisited. Blockages feel permanent. Wealthy people are not saying, "Is this the best use of this money?" because it sounds better. Many financially successful people naturally think this way, and that thinking tends to produce materially different financial behavior over time. This one sounds harmless. It even sounds healthy. Self-care, recognizing your own effort, treating yourself. But listen carefully to what the phrase is actually doing. "I deserve a reward" is the verbal trigger for the licensing effect. The same psychological mechanism we covered in an earlier episode. When you tell yourself you deserve a reward, you are granting yourself explicit permission to spend in a way that bypasses your normal financial judgment. The reward feels earned. That means the usual cost-benefit calculation gets suspended. That means you will spend more than you would have if you'd asked, "Do I actually want this, and is now the right time?" The wealthiest people you will ever meet are not people who never treat themselves. They are people who have never tied their spending decisions to deserving. They don't need to earn permission to spend. They make deliberate choices about what brings them genuine value, independent of whether they've been good enough to justify it. The replacement is not deprivation, it's precision. Instead of "I deserve a reward," the question becomes, "Is this something I genuinely want and have planned for?" Planned spending is not less enjoyable than impulsive spending. Some research suggests planned purchases are often reported as more satisfying than impulsive ones, in part because anticipated purchases, unlike guilt-driven impulsive ones, are less likely to come with a financial hangover. Every time the stock market drops significantly, the same phrase appears in conversations across every income level. "I'm waiting until things calm down before I invest." This phrase contains two buried assumptions, both of which are not strongly supported by long-term market evidence. The first assumption is that markets go through calm periods and risky periods that can be identified in advance. They don't, at least not in ways that allow reliable timing. The second assumption is that sitting in cash during a risky period is a safe alternative. It isn't. Over long periods, cash held outside productive investments often loses purchasing power because of inflation. Gradually, and without triggering any obvious alarm, many long-term investors report a similar shift. They stopped trying to time the market at some point, and their results tended to improve after that. Not because they got lucky, because they stopped making emotionally driven exit and re-entry decisions that consistently resulted in selling low and buying high. The wealthy don't say, "The market is too risky right now." They say, "My time horizon is long enough that short-term volatility is noise, not signal." Those two statements describe the same market. They produce completely different behavior. This one is perhaps the most expensive phrase on this list, not because it's dishonest, but because it sounds so reasonable that almost nobody questions it. The logic seems obvious. Invest more money when you have more money. But the math doesn't support waiting. Time in the market is a more powerful variable than the amount invested, because of compounding. A 25-year-old who invests a small amount consistently can, in many long-term scenarios, end up with significantly more than a 35-year-old who invests a much larger amount for a shorter period. The decade of compounding cannot be bought back. It can only be forfeited. The phrase, "I'll start when I earn more," is almost always masking something other than a financial calculation. It's usually masking discomfort with investing, uncertainty about where to start, or the feeling that the amount available is too small to matter. Those feelings are understandable, but they often don't reflect how long-term investing actually works. A small amount invested consistently in a simple index fund started today is not a gesture. It is the actual mechanism that produces long-term wealth for the vast majority of people who build it. The wealthy don't wait for the right amount. They start with the available amount and let time do its work. This one rarely gets said out loud. It lives beneath the surface of dozens of other decisions. The car that's slightly more expensive than necessary, the apartment in the neighborhood that signals success, the watch, the bag, the restaurant that's slightly beyond the budget. Several studies on wealth accumulation suggest a counterintuitive finding. The people with the most visible markers of success are not always the people with the most actual wealth. Many people with substantial wealth are the ones whose financial status is largely invisible to their immediate social circle, because they have tended to direct their money toward assets rather than toward signals. The psychologist Timothy Wilson described this as miswanting, valuing the appearance of having something more than the actual experience of having it. Visible spending produces social acknowledgement, which produces a short-term dopamine response, which reinforces the behavior. But the acknowledgement fades quickly. The depleted financial position it left behind does not. Wealthy people have, at some point, made peace with being financially invisible, not because they're humble. Some of them are not especially humble, but because they have become more interested in the actual number than in what the number communicates to other people. The last phrase is the most quietly destructive, because it is the only one on this list that is a statement about identity, rather than about a specific situation. "I'm not good with money" is not a fact about your abilities. It is a belief about your abilities. And research on fixed versus growth mindset, Carol Dweck, Stanford, consistently shows that beliefs about ability are among the most powerful predictors of whether someone develops that ability. When you tell yourself you're not good with money, you stop trying to become better at money. The belief closes the loop before behavior has a chance to change. Nobody is born good with money. Many of the financial behaviors associated with long-term wealth building, budgeting, investing, delayed gratification, understanding compounding, are learnable skills, not fixed traits. The wealthy people who were not born into wealth did not discover they had a special talent. They learned specific things, made specific decisions, and built specific habits. That process is available to anyone who stops accepting a story about their own limitations as fact. Here's the obvious pushback. Rich people can afford to think differently because they have more money. These mindset shifts don't help if you're actually financially constrained. This is a real and fair objection. And it's partially true. Financial constraints are real, and no phrase change eliminates them. But here's what the research actually shows. The language and mental models described in this video are not the result of becoming wealthy. For most people who build wealth from an ordinary starting point, these shifts in thinking preceded the financial improvement. often by years. The way you think about money influences the decisions you make with whatever amount you currently have. Better decisions with small amounts build the foundation for better outcomes with larger amounts. For many people who build wealth over time, these mindset shifts become part of the process rather than simply the result. Here's the rule one more time. What you say about money in public is performance. What you do with money in private is strategy. 6 phrases. 6 buried assumptions. 6 places where the language most people use about money is quietly making their financial decisions for them before they've had a chance to think clearly. You don't need to change your income to start changing these. You need to notice when the phrase appears, ask what assumption it's hiding, and replace the assumption with a question that keeps your agency in the picture. If this made you think about one phrase you've been using without examining it, subscribe to Wealth Tactics. Every week we pull apart one more piece of money psychology that's running in the background of your financial life. Drop a comment and tell me which of the 6 you recognized most in yourself. I read everyone. This has been Eunice for Wealth Tactics. See you in the next episode.